The future of energy production often slips under the radar of important political issues we're currently facing, but for those who have been paying attention to the energy market today, compared to the projected requirements for new industries like AI and quantum computing, as well as major grid vulnerabilities, complacency will lead to major problems, and potentially in the near future. Our aging infrastructure can bottleneck output, is more susceptible to extreme weather, can make it difficult to implement new technologies, may hinder our ability to grow into advanced technologies, and put us at a disadvantage to near-peer adversaries. However, it's not just grid problems that loom over the future. An ICF International analysis shows that U.S. electricity demand is expected to grow 25% by 2030 and 78% by 2050, compared to 2023 consumption. Similarly, they expect U.S. peak electricity demand to grow 14% by 2030 and 54% through 2050. This is a pretty dramatic increase, not just compared to historical growth over the past 2 decades, but also compared to future growth projections made as recently as 2023. But there is some good news, in that we can knock out both issues at the same time. And that can be done by heavily investing in nuclear energy. 94 nuclear reactors across the US currently provide 19% of total US energy, and only one new plant has been completed in the 21st century. Now, I understand that nuclear power plants have very high upfront costs, and many people against nuclear power cite the levelized cost of energy to say that other renewables like solar and wind are more cost efficient, but I don't think that's remotely the whole story. Besides there being many benefits to nuclear energy that may make a slightly higher investment worth it, better government policies could drastically bring down the cost while simultaneously using these building projects to upgrade grid infrastructure. But before getting into how that could happen, let's look at why people advocate against nuclear energy. The main argument against nuclear power is the cost that I mentioned, having a levelized cost of energy of between $141 and $220 per megawatt hours, compared to $50 to $31 for utility solar and storage, $81 to $217 for community, commercial, and industrial solar, and $31 to $86 for onshore wind. Many critics of nuclear energy simply look at that and make up their mind, believing wind and solar are overall better investments. However, there are a few reasons why that really doesn't give the whole picture. For one, investment into materials for solar and wind has grown a lot more in the past few years than materials for nuclear power, and this investment and interest drives manufacturing up and costs down. Now, I will go into more problems with the LCOE and government policies, but I want to quickly touch on other criticisms first. The obvious one being the danger of meltdowns or radiation leaks, which people refer to Chernobyl, 3 Mile Island, and Fukushima as major disasters. And Chernobyl was a major disaster, no doubt, but the reason why it was so bad was because the Soviet Union's culture of hiding mistakes out of fear of punishment. If you punish people for making honest mistakes, then it's no wonder that those people hide their mistakes until the mistakes become too big to hide. Also, we're talking about 1980s Soviet monitoring technology, with no cameras or updated ways of understanding what exactly happened in the reactor, which delayed their response. 3 Mile Island was a partial meltdown after a release valve was stuck open even though it read as closed, which again we're talking about 1970s monitoring technology and since changed procedures. But with that, affected people were exposed to an average of 1 millirem of radiation, and getting a chest x-ray exposes you to 6 millirem. And finally, Fukushima melted down due to an earthquake-induced tsunami. The earthquake damaged the electrical grid, and then the tsunami damaged the water pumps that cooled the reactors. Seems like a pretty crazy sequence of events that can be easily avoided here. Just make sure that we're not building reactors directly on the San Andreas Fault, and that extreme weather possibilities for the area are considered in the building process. I think between the 94 power plants currently operating and the 500 reactors built to power the Navy's nuclear-powered ships, we've proven that we can safely sustain nuclear power. Some other arguments against are nuclear proliferation risks, where to put nuclear waste, and the hazards of mining uranium, but these aren't very strong arguments. Any country with the resources to invest in nuclear energy probably have the resources to fund a nuclear weapons program, unless the power plant is a result of foreign investment, which also means the country is unlikely to be able to support weaponizing the uranium. And at the end of the day, countries are going to do what they want to do. We can try to have the UN Atomic Energy Agency monitor all the uranium around the world, but if a country wants to enrich it further, they will regardless of whether or not it's under the guise of nuclear energy. So I don't think it's worth railing against the better alternative of sustainable clean energy production for those reasons. Plus, I'm talking specifically about energy investment in the US, which I think has plenty of nuclear weapons already. Nuclear reactors also produce about 3 cubic meters of high-level waste per year, which is recycled into new fuel or buried in secure containers. And if you pooled all of the waste from all 94 of the reactors in the US together, The space it will take up is less than a half of an Olympic-sized swimming pool. And lastly, mining uranium is hazardous, but so is mining just about anything. So I find it ironic that anti-nuclear people cite uranium mining hazards as a critique, but don't think about the lithium and cadmium mining needed for their batteries and solar panels. Getting back to the cost argument, there is a problem with the simple use of levelized cost of energy to condemn nuclear energy as costly. The problem is that LCOE doesn't actually take real-world considerations into account. Things like intermittence, additional infrastructure, and spare capacity needs are not considered into the dollar per megawatt hours measurement in the LCOE. Resources don't exist in isolation or in perfect environments. One of the core weaknesses of renewables is not the cost, but intermittency that requires dispatchable generation sources to provide a backstop for when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. The Clean Air Task Force said in their report earlier this year that the use of levelized cost of energy is especially fraught in the context of long-term system and deep decarbonization planning, clean energy technology value assessment, and supplying the recent surge in load growth forecasts. This is because LCOE often does not account for the full electricity system cost necessary to deploy a generator at large scales, such as the transmission and distribution infrastructure necessary to deliver power to consumers. According to the Electric Power Supply Association, unlike a traditional levelized cost of energy, a full cycle analysis of generation costs takes into account the need for backup generation, new transmission, curtailment, and resource adequacy measures that ensure reliable generation. Variants of this full cycle method include the International Energy Agency's value-adjusted LCOE and EPSA's own full cycle LCOE. The full cycle study found that cost of providing resource adequacy services is more than 100% of the traditional LCOE of wind and solar units. Traditional LCOE also does not consider how much space renewable options take up. The Nuclear Energy Institute points out that to generate the same amount of electricity as a 1,000 megawatt reactor, a wind farm needs over 140,000 acres, which is over 170 times the land needed for a nuclear reactor. The land required to produce a million megawatt hours for nuclear is 103 acres, compared to 3,200 for solar and 17,800 for wind. Nuclear energy facilities also have an average capacity factor of 90%, meaning that the average nuclear plant remains online generating electricity more than 90% of the time. And by contrast, wind farms had an average capacity factor of 34.3%, and solar farms had an average capacity factor of 23.2% in 2024, according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. And on the waste problem, the International Renewable Energy Agency estimates that there will be 78 million tons of solar panel waste by 2050, and it costs $20 to $30 to recycle a panel versus $1 to $2 to send it to a landfill, according to the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. All of this being said, there's no doubt that nuclear energy requires a big initial investment, but there are unnecessary reasons for that and thus plenty of ways to reduce it. All forms of power have different distributions of cost. For natural gas plants, up to 70% of their electricity cost comes from the cost of fuel. With nuclear plants, 60 to 80% of their electricity cost comes from constructing the plant itself, and decreasing these construction costs would drive down the cost of electricity substantially. So what caused the increase in the first place? A 2020 paper by Eastgates examined the cost increases for a sample of nuclear power plants built between 1976 and 88, and it found that 72% of the cost increase was due to indirect costs, indicating a large increase in expensive professionals such as engineers and managers. And that problem remains today. An OECD Nuclear Energy Agency study that looked at nuclear plant cost estimates made from 2010 to 2020 found that the increases in indirect costs are the main driver of nuclear plant cost overruns, with labor making up 80% of indirect costs. But what made labor on nuclear build sites increase so much more than other industries? The answer is simple: the government. A 1980 study found that increased regulation between the late 60s and mid-70s was responsible for a 176% increase in plant costs and increased labor requirements by 137%. Regulatory guides stipulating acceptable design and construction practices for reactor systems and equipment grew almost sevenfold, from 21 in 1971 to 143 in 1978. And sure, not all of those regulations may have been bad, but over the course of the 1970s, these changes approximately doubled the amount of materials, equipment, and labor, and tripled the design engineering effort required per unit of nuclear capacity, according to the Atomic Industrial Forum. And the main issue is the constantly changing nature of these regulations. In 2009, for instance, Westinghouse was forced to change the containment building for its reactor to withstand aircraft strikes. which was a post 9/11 ruling by the NRC, 7 years after it had applied for approval of the design. The change, which had to be implemented in the in-progress Vogtle and VC Summer plants, has been blamed for delays and cost increases on the two plants. In Charles Kamanoff's 1981 power plant cost escalation, he notes that reactors in the 1970s were built increasingly in an environment of constant change that precluded control or even estimations of costs, and which magnified the direct cost impacts of new regulations and design changes. Constant changes made it nearly impossible to coordinate site work effectively, and the labor cost increase was at least partially due to frequently changing regulations during the period, which caused extensive design changes, delays, rework, and general coordination issues on in-progress plants. The other major cost factor is the onerous quality control and documentation requirements. A 2017 report from the U.S. Department of Energy's Office of Nuclear Energy estimates that quality control requirements make up 23% of the cost of concrete and 41% of the cost of structural steel in nuclear plants. An analysis also found that nuclear-grade components were in some cases 50 times more expensive than off-the-shelf industrial-grade ones, even though nuclear-grade components don't necessarily have higher performance requirements than conventional components. Reinforcing steel and nuclear-grade concrete is the same material used in conventional concrete. The additional cost comes from the additional documentation and testing required. Documentation requirements also increase costs indirectly by reducing market competition among manufacturers simply because many don't bother to manufacture nuclear-grade components due to the overbearing requirements. Combined with the fact that the US hasn't been building many new power plants for decades, and it's no wonder why the pool of potential suppliers is so small. So how can we build nuclear power with time and cost efficiency? Well, we don't really have to look that far. Both China and Korea have managed to build several recent reactors in under 6 years without major cost overruns, and China plans on building 150 new reactors in the next 10 years. In the US, the scale and lead time of nuclear power plant construction causes builders to push to start construction before the design is even complete, but starting with an incomplete design inevitably results in design changes during the process, causing delays and expensive rework. Lower-cost plants have greater percentages of their designs completed at the start of construction than higher-cost plants. Another option is to basically copy and paste designs to cut down the time and cost of slightly modifying them. By using mature designs that don't need to be changed during the construction process, builders not only know exactly how many materials they need, but also get better and faster at building the same design, a model seen successfully in the French reactor fleet. However, this only works with stability in government regulations. A stable design is only possible if a plant can be permitted to build without needing to change to conform to constantly updated regulatory requirements. Otherwise, you end up with serious delays and cost-plus contracts that disincentivize completing the project under budget. Before closing, I have to cover the national security grid vulnerabilities mentioned at the beginning. The Government Accountability Office points out that the U.S. electricity grid is really 3 interconnected transmission grids covering the contiguous United States. It's divided into the western states, Texas, and then the eastern and midwestern states. They found that the grid is becoming more vulnerable to cyber attacks, particularly those involving industrial control systems that support grid operations. The increasing adoption of high-wattage consumer smart devices connected to the internet and the use of GPS to synchronize grid operations are additional risks. Cyber threats are also complex and evolving, with AI-powered malware that can rapidly identify vulnerabilities, automate cyber intrusions, and evade traditional security measures in real time. Add general aging infrastructure that experiences more blackouts than many other developed nations, and a recent Department of Energy report that blackouts could increase by 100 times by 2030, and clearly we have a problem that requires investment. To end, this isn't a competition between nuclear and other forms of energy. It's just that I think nuclear energy has been falsely derided as too expensive, dangerous, or inferior to other energy systems. There certainly can be cooperation between modern energy systems, and some might work better than others in certain areas. Solar might be much better than nuclear power in regions like the Southwest, where there's very little water to cool a reactor, but quite a bit of sun. And the ultimate goal is to create enough power to propel us into the future without driving up consumer costs. And in order to do that, we have to have smart investment, but also commit time and money into the future of energy and security. Thank you for watching. Let me know what you think we should be doing to ensure reliable electricity in the US. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.